Welcome to this Wednesday's edition of Market Mantra, the program in which we give you a complete update on the economic, business and stock market news of the day. I'm Arjun Chaudhary and with me is my co-anchor in Hindi, Vishal Sharma.
नमस्कार, मार्केट मंत्र में आप सभी का स्वागत। प्रतिदिन की तरह कार्यक्रम में लाएंगे आप तक देश और दुनिया के आर्थिक, व्यापारिक और शेयर बाजार से जुड़े ताजा समाचार। चर्चा के लिए आज कार्यक्रम में आमंत्रित है आर्थिक विशेषज्ञ जयंता दास। जयंता दास, स्टूडियो में आपका स्वागत।
शुक्रिया।
और सबसे पहले हेडलाइंस के साथ हैं अर्जुन चौधरी।
Domestic stock indices log marginal losses. Sensex finishes near the 53,000 mark. Nifty closes near 15,800 level. Rupee weakens to 78 rupees and 97 paise against the US dollar. Global stocks witness losses and Brent crude oil prices rise to trade near $118.50 per barrel.
घरेलू शेयर बाजारों में मामूली नुकसान दर्ज। सेंसेक्स 53,000 और निफ्टी 15,800 के स्तर के करीब हुए बंद। रुपया कमजोर होकर 78 रुपए 97 पैसे प्रति डॉलर के स्तर पर आया। वैश्विक शेयर बाजारों में गिरावट दर्ज और ब्रेंट कच्चे तेल की कीमतें $118.50 प्रति बैरल के आसपास। सबसे पहले शेयर बाजार की खबर। कमजोर वैश्विक संकेतों के बीच प्रमुख घरेलू शेयर सूचकांकों में आज गिरावट दर्ज हुई। उतार चढ़ाव भरे कारोबारी सत्र के बाद सेंसेक्स और निफ्टी मामूली गिरावट के साथ बंद हुए। सेंसेक्स 53,000 और निफ्टी 15,800 के आसपास बंद हुए। बॉम्बे स्टॉक एक्सचेंज का सेंसेक्स 0.25% के नुकसान से 134 अंक गिरकर 53,027 पर बंद हुआ। नेशनल स्टॉक एक्सचेंज का निफ्टी 33 अंक नीचे 15,799 पर आ गया। व्यापक बाजार की बात करें तो बीएसई मिड कैप सूचकांक 0.7% और स्मॉल कैप इंडेक्स 0.18% के नुकसान में रहे।
Sensex and Nifty today fell marginally in a volatile session. Both stock indices fell amid negative global cues. Sensex closed near the 53,000 mark, while Nifty ended near 15,800 level. Sensex declined by 134 points or 0.25% to finish at 53,027. Nifty slipped by 33 points to end at 15,799. In the broader market at the Bombay Stock Exchange, the mid-cap index plunged by 0.70% and the small-cap index ended 0.18% down. In the Sensex pack, 10 companies posted gains while 20 logged losses. NTPC was the top gainer as it climbed 2.4%. Reliance surged by 2%. Sun Pharma rose 1.2% and Bharti Airtel added 0.9%. On the other hand, Hindustan Unilever plunged 3.5%. Axis Bank tumbled 3% and Bajaj Financial Services declined by 2.2%. Titan fell by 1.6%. In sectoral indices at the Bombay Stock Exchange, 8 sectors gained while 12 witnessed losses. Power sector gained the most as it added 1.6%. Telecom rose 1.5%. Energy surged 0.9% and oil and gas ended 0.6% up. On the other side, BankX declined by 1.2% and information technology, consumer goods and finance indices ended 1% down. The overall breadth of the BSE trade was negative as shares of 1,472 companies gained while 1,835 companies fell. Shares of 143 companies remained unchanged. And let's have a look at how the rupee performed today.
जी अर्जुन, रुपए के प्रदर्शन पर नजर डालें तो अंतरबैंक विदेशी मुद्रा बाजार में आज रुपया डॉलर के मुकाबले 18 पैसे कमजोर होकर 78 रुपए 97 पैसे प्रति डॉलर के स्तर पर बंद हुआ। विश्व की 6 अन्य प्रमुख मुद्राओं की तुलना में डॉलर की मजबूती दर्शाने वाला डॉलर इंडेक्स 0.01% की वृद्धि से 104.51 पर था।
Well, Jayanta, what's your take on the market today? We had a glimpse of what happened on money matters. The market, in fact, fell by 134 points at the end of trade today. How would you look at market performance today? Once again, the FIIs were the net sellers. The question remains in terms of the volume of trade, not just in terms of the valuation of the stock indices. So what's your take on the market?
Well, I guess typically if we do a extreme short-term focus on how the markets are behaving at this point of time, you leave around this marginal change which has happened today, I believe we are still in very soft waters in terms of the inherent weaknesses underlying in the belly of the market at this point of time. That's the first. Secondly, given the FNO expiry happening I guess tomorrow, and then maybe from next week onwards, if you try to look for a direction, as I've said earlier in Money Mantra, 4 main indicators would be driving the market. Most of us know that, but let me just, for the sense of repeating, is one is obviously the impact of COVID, because although people believe we are post-COVID now, but we have seen how China has been, every time falling over, and for 2 months, 3 months, all manufacturing has stopped and things like that. Second would be how the ES rates span up in terms of, how fast they do it. People were expecting around 50 basis point hike over 7 installments over the next 12 months, which didn't happen. It's going to be much more faster, I believe. Third is the Ukraine-Russia war, which has extended beyond 100 days now. And once again, there is no foresight in terms of when it's going to end. There's no winners out there, unfortunately. Why fortunately? There are no winners out there. The war has dragged on tremendously. And the fourth reason, which I said domestically, is how the monsoons pan up. So, because around 6 to 8 weeks ago, we believed that the monsoons would be normal. However, if you take up, just as of now, as we speak, is the end of June, and western part of India is still to get to see those amount of rains which we normally see by the end of June happening. So these are building up concerns. Once again, domestic factors also obviously will be the inflation rate and the rate hikes which you have seen. I believe there will be another rate hike very shortly over the next few weeks in terms of taking the overall rate hikes to around around 135 basis points plus those levels. So these are a mixture of factors, and with the clouds of these remaining, despite our macro parameter stability happening somewhere down the line, but stock markets behave differently. Stock markets behave on how the situation of the day is, how globally the situation is panning up, and the global weaknesses is also there. So, as I said, I believe there will be a strong undercurrent of weakness in an overlying steady market, even if you see 50 to 53,000 to be dominating the market levels for a longer period of time. There would be intra-week swings. There would be maybe 1,000 point or 1,500 point jumps and all, but unless some of the clouds get cleared, as I said, they'll be dominant. And with this also, I was telling in the Money Mantra program, there are stocks which have done extremely well with 52-week highs getting clocked over the last 1 week, and that should not be an indicator of how the overall sense of stock markets are. But as I said, there is a strong cause of being extremely cautious in such a market at this point of time.
जी, जैन साहब, आपने अभी रिजर्व बैंक के ब्याज दरों में बढ़ोतरी की बात की, और उम्मीद भी ये ऐसी व्यक्त की जा रही है कि आगे भी रिजर्व बैंक दरों में बदलाव कर सकता है और बढ़ा सकता है। ऐसे में आपको लगता है कि जो घरेलू निवेशक है, जो शेयर बाजार में इन्वेस्ट करता है, उसके सामने कई और अब आकर्षक विकल्प होंगे अपना निवेश करने के लिए? जिस तरीके से ब्याज दरें बढ़ रही हैं, वो शेयर बाजार से दूर हो सकता है?
नहीं, मैं मानता हूं कि देखिए, ब्याज दर का जो वृद्धि है इस वक्त तो अभी उतना खैर नहीं है जहां पे वो सोचे कि भाई पोर्टफोलियो रिएलोकेशन करना चाहेंगे कि नहीं। हालांकि आने वाला 3, 4, 5 महीने के अंदर दरें ज्यादा होने की उम्मीद और ज्यादा है इस वक्त। दूसरी बात यह है कि हमेशा लोग बोलते हैं कि मार्केट जब सॉफ्टन करता है, बार्गेन हंट करना शुरू करे। मैं मानता हूं कि इस मार्केट में अभी भी बार्गेन हंटिंग वाला मार्केट का स्थिति है नहीं। उसका प्रधान तौर से ये है कि मौजूदा मार्केट में, जैसे मैंने थोड़ी देर पहले कहा, एक अंडरलाइंग वीकनेस मार्केट में है, और उस मार्केट में उस तरह का वीकनेस जारी होने का संभावना ज्यादा है, कम नहीं है। तो ऐसे सिचुएशन में निवेशकों को, जो हमेशा पहले हम बोलते हैं कि मार्केट अगर 60,000 के ऊपर है या 50 का नीचे है या 50 का 60 का बीच में है, आप अपना इन्वेस्टमेंट प्लान्स, आपका ओवरऑल टारगेट ऑफ एम्बिशन जो भी है, इंटरेस्ट लेवल मार्केट करना, उसको ध्यान रखते हुए आप अपने इन्वेस्टमेंट प्लान जारी रहे। देयर विल ऑलवेज बी गुड स्टॉक्स टू बाय, देयर विल ऑलवेज बी सम स्टॉक्स वेयर यू कैन सेल इवन एट दीज लेवल्स। तो यानी ये नहीं कि अगर आपको इस वक्त बैंक सस्ता मिल रहा है आप जाके तुरंत दौड़ के जाके बैंक खरीदे, या कोई भी आईटी सेक्टर में कोई स्टॉक अगर लग रहा है कि ज्यादा गिरावट हुआ, हालांकि जबकि टेलीकॉम वगैरह में अब देखिए मौजूदा टेलीकॉम का डिमांड इवन कोविड टाइम्स में भी काफी अच्छा रहा, टेलीकॉम शेयर्स का परफॉर्मेंसेस काफी अच्छे रहे, उसके बावजूद भी वीकनेसेस आया हुआ है। तो ऐसा स्थिति में हमेशा निवेशकों को ये चाहिए कि पोर्टफोलियो रीएलोकेशन इज ऑलवेज एक मंत्रा होता है जहां पे आप लगातार कोई भी स्थिति में बने रहे। हाँ, ये जरूर है कि मार्केट 60,000 करोड़ जब होता है जहां पे कोई भी चीज आप खरीद रहे हो कहीं कहीं आपको उसमें मुनाफा हो रहा है, लेकिन ओवरऑल जैसे मैंने कहा 2-3 साल का अवधि का साथ साथ आपका अगर 12 से लेकर 16% तक कहीं न कहीं इनकम होते हैं मार्केट से, तो आपका प्रदर्शन बहुत अच्छा माना जाएगा। और ये मार्केट जो 52-53-54 हजार का जो स्थिति है, जो स्तर है, इसमें मैं मानता हूं अगर आप चाहे पोर्टफोलियो रीएलोकेशन करने के लिए तो बेशक आप कर सकते हैं। और नॉट ओनली दैट, नया निवेश अगर आप करना चाहते हो तो उसमें भी क्षेत्र विशेष में जाके जहां पे आपको लगता है कि हाँ इसमें थोड़ा बहुत और नीचे आ सकता है, या देखिए एकदम बॉटम ऑफ द मार्केट तो कोई प्रेडिक्ट नहीं कर सकता, फिर सारे लोग अमीर होते हैं मार्केट में जो भी निवेश कर रहे हैं। तो ऐसा स्थिति में आप जाके कुछ बार्गेन हंटिंग भी बेशक इस स्तर में जाके कर सकते हैं। लेकिन मौजूदा अगर मैं बोलूं कि बार्गेन हंटिंग का मार्केट है जहां पे आप आके खरीदना, आंखें बंद करके स्टॉक्स आप चूज करते रहे, एब्सोल्युटली नो।
So clearly, value investing or bottom fishing is something that should be avoided by the small investors right now, unless the trends reverse. FIIs have been the net sellers to the tune of $28 billion from January to June onwards, and it's expected that they may or they might return from September onwards. So we're talking about July and August, where they would continue to be net sellers. You don't not only have an impact on the stock market, the Sensex and Nifty stock index valuation, but also on the rupee. The rupee continues to depreciate. It's 78.97 against the US dollar, and then if you add bank charges, it becomes even more expensive to buy the US dollar. So how concerned would you be about the national currency?
Well, obviously, when you have around 85% of the import basket dominated by oil, where you're dependent on it, and with oil prices at $117, $120 level, so it becomes costlier by the hour when rupee is falling at such a fast rate at these levels. But having said so, what I also believe is if you do a cross-currency check, rupee has not performed real badly, nor it has performed really well. So it has been an average performer in terms of how it has been moved against the dollar.
There are many comparisons to the yen, for instance, which has depreciated.
Exactly. So that's one point. There is also, Arjun, another point where, I was going through some of the articles where noted economist and, analyst Dr. Swaminathan Nair also has said that these levels are still, levels where rupee should go beyond this to make it more attractive, to make the Indian basket of export goods more attractive, because he believes that RBI has been intervening too much. That's his view, and I believe there is some meat into that whole argument. Now, for us, it's very easy to discuss all these things, but for the government of the day, where it has to face an import bill, which is terribly high, where it has to face a fluctuating oil price, and where dominantly a lot of the food products which we use are being imported at this point of time. For example, your oil, edible oil, for example. So all those things keep on adding up to the inflationary pressure. So for the government, it's just not a rupee issue to be tackled with. They have to actually focus through all other issues, and that's why maybe the RBI intervention is coming in much more aggressively in trying to hold the rupee a bit strong. If actually economics made sense, rupee should have been far more weaker than what these levels are. But then it's once again a political argument about where rupee is heading, and if rupee is becoming too expensive by the hour, dollar is becoming too expensive by the hour. It's a political, argument where people try to blame the government for not being able to control that. But then, as I said, it's a mixed basket, and if we have to focus on how we have an export-driven growth from these levels, it's also important to understand that the rupee should be, weakening a bit more to make our Indian exports much more. And let me tell you on the sidelines as a footnote, exports are doing really well in terms of volumes of exports, in terms of the overall size and things like that. So that also helps in the long run. But as I said, the immediate concerns of the government are what is happening at this hour, and obviously people would like the rupee to be not weakening beyond this, or even trying to appreciating at some decent levels at maybe 77, 76 levels, so that there is some comfort zone in terms of oil. The only solace or the only light in the end of the tunnel would be if oil prices start dropping sharply. I guess that to some extent would keep off the pressure on what rupee is facing right now.
Well, let's take some pressure off this program now. Let's take a short commercial break. So please stay tuned on Market Mantra.
उपभोक्ताओं तक पहुंचने का सुलभ और सस्ता माध्यम है आकाशवाणी।
आकाशवाणी के विभिन्न केंद्रों से कीजिए अपने उत्पादों और सेवाओं का प्रचार विज्ञापनों के माध्यम से।
लोकल और राष्ट्रीय स्तर पर कीजिए अपने बिजनेस का विस्तार, क्योंकि आकाशवाणी में विज्ञापन बुकिंग हुई बहुत ही आसान।
अब घर, दफ्तर या दुकान पर बैठे बैठे आप कर सकते हैं विज्ञापनों की बुकिंग।
डायल कीजिए 870-001-4242।
नंबर एक बार फिर नोट करें, 870-001-4242।
जी, मार्केट मंत्र में आपका फिर स्वागत है। हम शेयर बाजार पर चर्चा कर रहे थे, बात कर रहे थे। आज हम अगर सेक्टर वाइज देखें जयंता, तो पावर सेक्टर टॉप गेनर रहा है और 1.6% आज इसने गेन किया है, और एनटीपीसी को भी देखें तो 2.4% का इसमें हमें गेन दिखाई पड़ता है। तो पावर सेक्टर आपको मौजूदा परिस्थितियों में कितना अट्रैक्टिव सेक्टर लगता है निवेश के लिहाज से?
देखिए, मैं ट्रेडिशनली इट्स नॉट वन ऑफ द टॉप मोस्ट सॉर्ट आफ्टर सेक्टर्स में मानता हूं पावर का। हालांकि इस वक्त हमेशा मार्केट में जिस तरह का डिमांड होता है पावर क्षेत्र में, एज ए इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर भी अगर कहे तो हमेशा मार्केट में इंटरेस्ट रहता है, खास करके जब पावर का तो भी मतलब वैल्यूएशन अगर थोड़ा बहुत गिरावट होता है तो लोग कोशिश करते हैं इसको उठाने के लिए। बट सेपरेटली इफ यू प्लग इट आउट एज अ सेक्टर, अगर आप मेरे को पूछे पर्सनली, प्रधान 5 सेक्टर्स में अगर मैं खास करके बोलूं, मैं मानता हूं इंडियन पावर सेक्टर स्टिल हैज अ लॉन्ग वे टू गो, नंबर 1। नंबर 2, द अमाउंट ऑफ इन्वेस्टमेंट्स, खास करके स्टेट गवर्नमेंट्स का जो पावर सेक्टर के साथ जो भी मतलब रोल रहा है सेक्टर से भी ज्यादा, हम सबको पता है कि पावर क्षेत्र में बहुत ज्यादा एक्सेक्नेसेस, एनपीएस बहुत सारे हैं, ड्यूज, ह्यूज अमाउंट ऑफ ड्यूज है। इन्होंने कोल इंडिया को भी काफी स्टेट गवर्नमेंट से पैसा नहीं दे पाए। तो ये सारे चीजें मौजूदा हमारा सामने है पावर क्षेत्र में। और सिर्फ देश में नहीं, इवन दिल्ली में भी पावर का एक इशू पिछले 1 महीने से चर्चा में आ रहा है, जहां पे इतना पीक डिमांड है। मेरे ख्याल से कल भी दिल्ली का हिस्टोरिकली हाईएस्ट पीक डिमांड शाम को था, जिस वजह से मेरे को नहीं पता, कुछ जगह में लोड शेडिंग, हम भी जहां रहते हैं वहां पे भी लोड शेडिंग वगैरह होते रहते हैं। तो पावर सेक्टर इज नॉट इन द प्राइम ऑफ इट्स हेल्थ, ये तो है जरूर। समझना ये है कि एज ए इन्वेस्टमेंट मैं मानता हूं कि अगर लॉन्ग टाइम इन्वेस्टमेंट बेशक 7 साल 10 साल का मौजूदा अगर आप लेके चले, लाइक एनी इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर, इसमें आपको बेशक रिटर्न बहुत अच्छा मिल सकता है। लेकिन ये जरूर है कि मे बी टुडे इट वाज द फ्लेवर ऑफ द डे इन टर्म्स ऑफ हाउ पावर सेक्टर सेल एंड इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर लोग उठाने का कोशिश कर रहा है। बट इट्स सर्टनली नॉट मेरा 5 प्रिय सेक्टर्स का अंदर नहीं आता पावर सेक्टर।
Jayanto, we're seeing a lot of stock-specific action. If you look at the Sensex, as we read the story in the pack itself, 10 companies logged gains, while 20 suffered from losses in today's trade. What is the selection criteria of FIIs and DIIs? We tend to quote the net figures, the net buyers, net sellers, but they also buy almost 5,000 to 6,000 crore rupees worth of equities per day.
Yeah.
So what's the selection criteria when they're looking at sector or specific stocks?
Well, see, FIIs are driven, obviously, any investor will be driven by profits. And FIIs, whenever they do an investment strategy, they have a daily margin, they have a broad weekly or a quarterly or a monthly margin ahead. And based on that, the sectoral movement keeps on happening. What also happens is, as you rightly said, they move from a calendar year from Jan to December, and the investment horizons are based on that. Now, since U.S. stock markets, ever since the rate interest hike has started happening, and we have quite overgrowing U.S. and heated up U.S. markets at this point of time, they would obviously like to reallocate whatever investments they have done here in terms of shifting some of the investments back to Europe, some of them to U.S. markets, and even in Europe, it's much more stable market than what we have in Asia. Now, when you come to Asia, what happens is our Far East Asian markets, like those in Hong Kong, Taiwan, they are not as aggressive in terms of growth nor in falls. They are steady markets, but at the same time, the returns are not as huge in terms of what we see maybe in these part of the world, South Asian markets, where you bring in Singapore to some extent, India to some extent, which is the dominant markets. Now, when FIIs take their decision, mostly it comes through sort of herd mentality when they move in and move out of stocks and sectors specifically. It's basically the movement of money, and then obviously they also do a checkbox in terms of the sectors where we would like to move out from. Not necessarily because they don't like the sectors, but because they have a better place to park their money for the next 2 to 3 months, once again before they bring the money back in September. And they try to,
So we're talking about arbitrage.
Exactly. And then they try to roll on with the markets till the second week of December, and then try to close the positions when the Christmas holiday season starts and all. So that's how the FIs move. Broadly, on a day-to-day basis. Of course, all FIs would have an investment strategy which you and I would not be privy to at this point of time, and that investment strategy would be led by sector-specific markets. For example, from in China they would have a sector-specific preference. In India they would have a sector-specific preference, and those areas will be there. Basically mid-term to broad-term, long-term markets and all, and how they work. But then, as I say, and I always personally believed, the day traders in Mumbai, while we have thousands and thousands of day traders who make a living for years and decades after the Mumbai stock markets, the FIs, I believe, are much more institutional, face of those sorts of day trading which they try to do and they try to work out. So obviously, there is no particular investment strategy, but obviously 5-6 investment strategies and 5-6 focus areas but then they wouldn't wait for even an hour if they smell market money, if South Africa or Europe happening, they would immediately have to move out and try to invest in others. So they are, as investments should be, completely unemotional about where the money is parked in, irrespective of country or sector.
घरेलू शेयर बाजारों के बाद अब बात वैश्विक शेयर बाजारों की। एशियाई शेयर बाजारों की बात करें तो आज यहां गिरावट रही। हांगकांग का हैंगसेंग 1.9% और दक्षिण कोरिया का कोस्पी 1.8% लुढ़क गए। चीन का शंघाई कंपोजिट इंडेक्स 1.4% और जापान का निकेई 0.9% के नुकसान में रहे, जबकि सिंगापुर का स्ट्रेट्स टाइम्स इंडेक्स 0.2% की मामूली गिरावट के साथ बंद हुआ। यूरोपीय शेयर बाजारों की बात करें तो अंतर्देशीय कारोबार में यहां भी गिरावट का रुख था। फ्रांस के कैक में 0.7% की गिरावट रही। जर्मनी का डेक्स 1.3% के नुकसान में चल रहा था। लंदन के FTSE 100 में 0.1% की मामूली तेजी दिखाई पड़ी।
Moving on to the US stock market, Wall Street closed sharply lower in a broad sell-off as dire consumer confidence data dampened investor optimism and fueled worries over recession and the looming earnings season. Dow Jones Industrial Average slipped 1.6%, S&P 500 fell 2%, and the Nasdaq Composite indices declined by 3%. Jayanto, apart from the underlying economic values, and right now both for the Asian and the North American markets, the US market, inflation is a major cause for concern, which would hit the operating margin of companies. You have the earnings season in the US that's coming up. What is the psychology of the investors when you look at the Robinhood investors, because they are making a substantial part of how the purchasing or the selling in the market is going, apart from your FIIs and the hedge funds? Well,
see, actually, if you ask me very frankly, I see a very dark next 3 months in terms of how global markets will be panning up. Maybe some signals have come in with Bitcoins, slashing or jumping down almost 70% of the value in one single day. So, I mean, that's another different story. No one wants to discuss cryptocurrency and the benefits out of it or the falls out of it. But then these, let's not forget, these are the same set of investors who have parked some money here and there in terms of... But they're cashing out from crypto, moving on to the equity markets. No, but that's what I said. It's very easy to actually say that you're trying to cash out from crypto and all, but then crypto is a part of our life right now. I mean, you just can't forget it, in terms of whatever returns it has given around. So, and obviously crypto is not a place where institutional investors would like to go and, try their luck out. It's basically driven by individual investors rather than corporate money and things like that. But having said so, what's also important to understand is how the US markets are trending up. Now, we are talking of 40-year high inflation since the last 8 months and overage inflation. With $3 trillion of money, almost helicopter money, which has been thrown into the US consumers' hands, who have gone out and just bought out whatever they could with that money. And this was a real reason why the whole thing puffed up. But what has also happened is there is a huge bubble which has been created. And this bubble is now being spoken of much more prevalently in the last 4 to 6 weeks. A small example I'll give you. I was hearing an interview of, real estate owners who are out of Miami, which is obviously, as you know, after Los Angeles is one of the largest places where people make money out of rent from the Miami properties, not out of sale. And there were people who own hundreds and hundreds of apartments who now are telling they are not only facing huge crash in lease because people are finding it much more lucrative to buy property and sell it off in next 2 to 3 months. So that's the time period of investments which they're having, and those are very dangerous signals. And we all know how the last meltdown happened. Where people wanted to go in, invested money in real estate, and then it crashed in within 6 to 9 months.
Asset bubble.
Exactly. So that's one part of the story. The other part is with the huge inflationary things staring at India, US economy, and with the earnings season very soon to come out, inflation would obviously be hitting hard globally. And I do feel a domino effect to happen. Now in India we are trying to also manage our rate of interest to a manner so that inflation is curbed down, but it's already at quite concerning levels at this point of time. And let's not forget, this is a typically low lean period of the economic cycle. So June, July, August, and from September onwards, when once again things start moving in terms of higher production, higher demand and things like that, you won't be knowing to what extent we'll be able to kickstart our position from there with the high inflation levels which we see now. So if you ask me for a broad picture, I do believe that it's not one of the best times. Sorry, I'm trying to bring in a doomsday. It's not a doomsday scenario, but certainly matter of concern is in terms of whether markets would crash in a much more deeper and graver manner, hurting all of us from these levels. So that's the question, or whether this is a bottom out level and we see markets, if not crashing, at least holding steady. I personally don't see it holding steady at these levels, if you ask me very frankly.
So apart from the oil market, and that's a story we will read after this US market discussion, commodity prices, especially base metal, has actually come down. Yet there are concerns about inflation, especially in the US. Why is that the case? And they're talking about in fact being in recession right now. It's not been even announced officially, with 2 quarters of consecutive fall in growth.
Yeah. See, as I said, despite that fall and despite the high inflation scenario, what might happen is, these things happen in a single shot go. So we might wake up one particular week and see a real bad fall and a bad week, and that could be, the final signal of how the markets are heading from there on. And as I said, a very indicative factor is how G7 is now trying to outgrow China in terms of manufacturing together. I mean, it took them 20 years to reach and do this.
It can also be a short selling tactic.
Yeah, so that's what I said, and that's where, if global leaders are sitting together trying to figure these things out, it's a matter of concern in the horizon, and that's something which no leader would like to come out officially and say, but everyone is trying to ready their situation, so that if in case there is a situation which comes up in 3 to 4 months where we see a crash, there should be some sort of preparedness to face this crash.
Let's have a look at the oil market now. Oil prices today gained for a fourth straight session amid tight supply. However, concerns about the global economy capped the gains. Crude prices gained more than 0.5%. Brent crude was trading at $118.60 per barrel, while WTI crude prices were at $112.60 per barrel. On Money Matters, we discussed about the oil market, and then you now talking about provisioning as well. What kind of provisioning are we doing for oil so that we are able to balance out an increase in prices?
Well, in India, we are talking about provisioning. I don't think there is a strategy in terms of provisioning. What they're trying to do is the basket of goods which they're buying, as in oil from countries, specifically Russia. I think that's where the back channel talks are happening in terms of how much of oil would be coming from Russia in the next 1 month, 2 months, 3 months, because there are rupee trade which everyone agreed to. That's one further story. The other part is, I would like to make a comment on the supply side constraints, which I believe at this point of time is more of an eyewash. I think there will be severe demand side slump, which would soften the oil prices further from here. So that's the story which we should look forward to in the coming weeks.
और बात सोने की कीमतों की। मल्टी कमोडिटी एक्सचेंज पर अगस्त अनुबंध वाला सोना आज 280 रुपए की तेजी से 51,100 रुपए प्रति 10 ग्राम पर चल रहा था। जुलाई अनुबंध वाली चांदी भी 250 रुपए महंगी होकर 59,790 रुपए प्रति किलो के स्तर पर कारोबार कर रही थी। न्यूयॉर्क मर्केंटाइल एक्सचेंज में सोना बढ़त के साथ $1,828 प्रति औंस पर था।
It's time to thank our business analyst Jayant Das for being with us on the program Market Mantra. And before we close, let's have a look at the headlines once again. Domestic stock indices log marginal losses. Sensex finishes near 53,000 mark. Nifty closes near 15,800 level. The rupee weakens to 78 rupees and 97 paise against the US dollar. Global stocks witness losses, and Brent crude oil prices rise to trade near $118.50 per barrel. And that's it in this edition of Market Mantra for now. Goodbye.
नमस्कार।